it's one thing to have someone on election day leading by 200,000 votes, and it's pretty clear how it's going, and you make the call. It's another thing to say, oh, this is all very close, this is disputed, and we really can't make the call. Because to make the call essentially judges the legal and other claims and processes available to the candidate. The Trump campaign filed a big lawsuit this week in Pennsylvania, highlighting and putting on the record allegations of voter fraud and voter misconduct and maladministration that calls into question the results of the Pennsylvania election as they're currently being reported. Now, if you recall my report to you last week, I highlighted the federal law, 3 U.S.C. Section 1, that seems to require that the states select the electors on Tuesday, meaning the election day. I'm paraphrasing. You can go look it up yourself, 3 U.S.C. Section 1. And it raises questions, obviously, about not only counting ballots that arrive after Election Day, but counting ballots past Election Day, and certainly counting ballots past Election Day in a way that changes the results of the ballot counts that occurred on Election Day itself. And, they screwed up. It was foreseeable. The left was telling us this was going to happen, that the president would win on election night, but not win on past, that he'd end up losing as these additional votes were counted. Votes that, frankly, can't be given much credence given the way they were handled and counted and from where they came. When you have in states like Georgia, for instance, have voter ID for in-person voting, but practically speaking, no voter ID when you vote by mail, how's that supposed to work? You have two different sets of standards for voters depending on how they vote. Does that sound legitimate to you? Now, getting back to the court case in Pennsylvania, I encourage you to review the filing made by the campaign, not because I'm supporting the campaign, it's because I think it raises significant issues that any American would be concerned about. They make the allegation that, and I think it's been confirmed, it's just a matter of what their relief will be, that north of 600,000 ballots, mail-in ballots, or ballots generally, were counted in Pennsylvania, specifically Philadelphia and the Pittsburgh area, without the required observation by the Trump campaign. The law requires that you have an opportunity to observe the ballots, and they were prevented any meaningful opportunity to observe the ballot counting. And so when you have illegally secretive ballot counting, that obviously ought to raise questions about whether those ballots were fraudulently counted or should be counted at all. And that's one of the key issues that the campaign is raising. So when everyone tells you that there's no chance in Pennsylvania of anything happening, well, that's simply not true. It's simply not true. This is a very substantial, credible claim in my view. Also, it raises they raised the question of some votes being more equal than others in Pennsylvania, kind of like the issue I raised in Georgia. But more specifically, law prohibits them from touching ballots before Election Day, more or less. And what was happening in Pennsylvania was that, as the lawsuit alleges, that in Democrat counties, they were looking at the absentee ballots, handling them and effectively processing them, and seeing if they were deficient in some way. And if they were actively trying to get the ballots cured or fixed by communicating with voters. The problem is in Republican-oriented counties, that was not taking place. They were actually following the law. So you had more ballot harvesting, more or less, or voter harvesting taking place contrary to law in Democrat Biden-leaning counties. And so that raised an additional legal claim that they were brought in, equal protection and variations of that that they're raising with the court. So those are two big issues. There are other issues that the complaint raises, but I thought those were the two most important ones worth considering. So I don't know what the court's going to do. They've got the briefings due and everything's due this weekend, and there'll be a hearing on it next week. I'm not sure what's happening in the other jurisdictions. Certainly, there's more than enough information out there in the form of affidavits evidencing voter fraud in the sense of the structural issues I've raised, where they were counting ballots, changing the results as counted on election day, and then having a new candidate winning within days. It's now 10 days after the election, and we still don't have essentially. You don't have literally certified results. Obviously, that's a very different legal issue. But we still don't know who quote won in practically speaking in these key states because they're still counting and they still haven't figured it out. Now I know the media is calling elections, but that's a legal and political decision they're making that I would dispute. They're not basing it on numbers alone. And the AP, the Associated Press, had a story the other day of essentially confirming that they look at the numbers, but they also make judgment calls about the political and legal challenges to the election outcomes or the election counting and tallying. So they're putting their thumb on the scales in favor of Joe Biden. I think inappropriately so. I mean, it's one thing to have someone on election day leading by 200,000 votes, and it's pretty clear how it's going, and you make the call. It's another thing to say, oh, this is all very close, this is disputed, and we really can't make the call. Because to make the call essentially judges the legal and other claims and processes available to the candidate. Now, I know that's a judgment call in the end, but let's recognize it's a judgment call in the end. So let's not pretend this is, as I say, the Constitution doesn't give the media the right to select the president or call him president-elect. That's just the political statement at this point, to be fair.